past week was President's Day. Does anybody know what presidents' birthdays are in February that we're remembering? Washington and Lincoln. Our street that goes by our church is named after one of them. Does anybody know which one? Yeah, Ford, no. Lincoln, yes. And it's fitting. Those two consistently rank at the top of the list, whether it's historians or political scientists or just the general population ranking best presidents. They consistently rank very, very highly. I suppose that's not true in the South, but it is pretty consistently across the country. And it'd be fun to talk about their stories. There are reasons why they are so highly respected. Washington was born in the 1730s, and this is where I say that's even older than Rob Donnell. And which means he was in his 40s when the whole thing started, the revolution. And around 50 when he was asked to preside over the convention that wrote the Constitution. He cared about those things. He believed very much that the colonies, they did have a sort of a constitution, an Articles of Confederation thing. He believed they needed a stronger central government, and so he was very glad to participate in that convention that wrote the Constitution. It's the same Constitution we have now. It's been amended several times, but 10 of those amendments were done right away within the first few years because they all knew, they kind of agreed, we've got to do some more here. But he believed in those things. He was, all I want to do here, so much we can talk about these two guys. All I want to do is I tried to get, I just thought, what are some words that stand out to me when I think about them that makes them examples? Now, they did some things, and they thought some things that I don't agree with. Everybody in the world does things I don't agree with, and thinks weird thoughts. But still, they're guys that I look up to. In fact, one of my sons' middle name is Lincoln. And it was because of the president. And as I thought of what are key things I look up to them for, it's these 4 words that came to my mind. Vision. They both had their own vision. They weren't just playing the crowds and reading the polls. They had their own sense of what they wanted and what the nation needed. And they devoted themselves to that. Now, there have been a lot of people who have had that didn't achieve prominence, and that's the way it goes. But these guys did have it. Integrity. They were both known for being men of integrity. You know what? Anyone want to tell me what the word integrity means? Connie likes to use the illustration of kitchen sinks. Back in the day, you had a porcelain sink, but there was actually steel. And it had a glossy white porcelain on it. And if you dropped the skillet on it and chipped a piece of that off, you saw what was underneath, which was not the glossy porcelain, whatever color it was. But now you can buy sinks that are the same thing all the way through. I forget what they call them, different kinds of stuff they make them out of. If you drop something on them and chip them, you got to drop something serious on it to chip it. But you do, it's the same stuff inside as outside. It's one all the way through. That's really what the word integrity means. It means one. So that a man is a man of integrity or a woman of integrity is a person who really is the same all the way through. Now, situations change, and I may be sick and crabby one day, and I may be really hurt by somebody or something some other day, or I may just have heard something that makes me really angry, and, each of us, this can happen to us, and so you get different reactions out of us. But the question is it really the same? Is it the same person? And the thing about Washington, one example for Washington was, through a series of events, he became the commander of the armies during the Revolution. The Revolution was a hideous nasty war. And, you know, it wasn't just a stroll in the park. And not only that, the Americans didn't have a chance. The British had all the weapons, I mean, you know, all the training, all the discipline, all the experience. But Washington was exceedingly stubborn and exceedingly courageous and exceedingly committed to it, and he got us through, and not only that, won. The British actually had to surrender because he captured a couple major armies. Right after that, he was the most worshipped, you know, he was the favorite guy in the colonies. He was the great hero. That he was tough, he was smart, he was persistent, he got things done. He lost a lot of battles because of the situations, but he won the war. And he was in a position, probably, given the weight of his personality and his achievements, to ask whatever he wanted. And what he did was he resigned from that office, that position as the commander-in-chief. He could have used it to pad his own nest for the rest of his life, to make himself a big, hot item, you know, the number one person. He resigned. Then when they called him to participate in the Constitutional Convention, he didn't come in as the great lord and the great conqueror. He came in as a man they trusted. And so when it came time to elect the first president in 1788, get this, he was unanimously elected. Can you imagine? Unanimously picked. Everybody thought, I may not agree with him, but at least I can trust him. And some of them certainly disagreed with him. But to me, that's quite a standard. He had a vision for what the colonies could be as a nation together. He believed in the Constitution. He was devoted to these things. People knew that. They might not agree entirely with him, but they felt they could trust him, that there was a man who would not cheat them, who was not working behind the scenes against anybody. Courage, his courage showed up in a number of different ways. One is being willing to accept being the commander-in-chief, getting through all that stuff. There's a lot of stories of Washington's courage, where his life was on the line. And where he was, if he were captured by the British, you know, his future kind of went kaput if he got captured. So he had it all on the line. And that famous scene of crossing the Delaware, you know, if he was standing up in the boat like that in the middle of winter, he's an idiot. But I don't think he probably was, you know, but it demonstrated he was doing something that was totally unexpected, and it was a significant move by the American armies. And persistence. Maybe one of the biggest stories there is the winter at Valley Forge. You've heard of it. 12,000 men came in. 2,500 of them died in a few months because it wasn't bitter sub-zero cold, but it was freezing, thawing, freezing, thawing, freezing, thawing, snowing, raining on all winter long. They didn't have enough food. They didn't have enough clothes. They didn't have enough blankets. They didn't have enough anything. And I'm saying, you know, I think I'll move to England. They'll treat me nice, you know. And but he sticks it out and pulls them back together as an army. So very persistent over his life. Lincoln, same kind of stories. Lincoln, you know, grew up. The education he had, he gave himself. He didn't depend on anybody else for that education. He did it. He made it his business to get the education he needed. He was known even as a young man as Honest Abe. He won some elections and he lost some elections, and he had this fabulous campaign all over Illinois for a election for the United States Senate, and got beat. You know, he was a very thoughtful man. The Bible was important to him. It influenced his moral thinking, and it influenced his theology. So by the time 1860 was here, it was early in 1860, he was asked to come from Illinois to New York City to make a speech. And he didn't have Google. he had to do all this work by himself. He did an enormous amount of research to pull together what the writers of the Constitution thought and put it together in a very powerful speech that actually basically won him the Republican nomination for president. Then, of course, they mocked him. They hated him. They despised him completely. He was tall. He was skinny. He walked funny because he had learned to walk walking over plowed ground. You know, so you kind of pick your feet up funny because the ground is soft and it's got clods on them. They call them clodhoppers. He was a clodhopper. Still in the White House, they say. He walked funny. And yet, to my mind, probably the best public speaker of the American language. It's just incredible the way he could put words and things together briefly. You know, when he made the Gettysburg Address, the newspapers really mocked him. In fact, did you see that last year? Some newspaper in Pennsylvania publicly apologized in print for what they had said about Lincoln's Gettysburg Address in 1863. Finally, all these years later, they apologized in print for how stupid that was. But in a very few words, he summarized his whole vision for what America should be. He was known as Honest Abe. People felt that. One man writing about him after he was assassinated said he was the purest politician, not meaning he was purely political, but that he was pure, that he was an honest man. He's the purest politician I have ever known, the guy said. He was a good, great man. And that's the reputation he had, people who knew him. You know, he did not believe in slavery. He said, as I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. He said, to those people who say that slavery is good for people, when I hear him say that, I have a tremendous urge to see it tried on them personally. So it gives you some feel for where he stood. He was not where we are today in his thinking about race, but he did not want slavery to expand. And the South took that as a great assault and offense. So you know how that all went. It was not pretty. Persistence, it's kind of brutal to read a history of the Civil War and see how many times he had a general in place who didn't have the guts to do the next thing. And Lincoln would give, you know, he would wait until he couldn't stand it anymore, and then he'd fire the guy and replace him. And this just happened continually until he got a hold of Ulysses Grant. But he was determined. And one of my stories I like about Lincoln, I think about myself sometimes, I practice it, is when he died, somebody found a letter in a desk drawer where he had just blistered somebody. I don't remember who or what the occasion was, but it was like 2 or 3 years old. But he had just blistered him in this letter. And what he had done, and this was his habit, when he got really angry at somebody, he would write him a letter and then he'd never send it. But he would have dealt with it himself, and so he would know when he met them what were the issues between them, you know, and it helped him be a little more cool in his relations. Anyway, I felt like these two guys really exemplify these things. And all I want to say is this is the sermon. We're going to look at them. Washington had slaves. When he died, in his will, all his slaves were freed. But he had slaves. And Jefferson had slaves. And Madison had slaves. All these great heroes of our history had slaves, you know. And it's just kind of weird. And they didn't really feel it was right. And Jefferson said, I tremble for my country when I think that God is just. And it was about that issue. So, you know, there's this going on. Lincoln was from the North. He didn't really know black people. He had different approaches, but he didn't want to see slavery happening. So, and we can go into politics. A lot of things we would disagree with him on. But I'll tell you what, if we in our own lives can get these 4 things, I don't have to have a vision for the whole world government. I don't have to have a vision for Lincoln. But I do have to have some vision for my household. That's where we live. That's where you live. Some sort of vision that is good and healthy, and that to you, you're going to hang on to it. That it matters. That you've thought about it, that you've looked around, you've talked with people. This matters to you. You're going to hold this. And we go back and read their papers and their speeches. We won't agree entirely with their vision for America, but we'll agree largely. We won't get it all right either, but we need to have some standards, some things that are beautiful and good and healthy, that are vision for us. At work, at home, at church, and in other places where we're involved. Integrity. This is harder than it looks. It doesn't just mean that you don't lie very often. This whole idea of if an anvil drops on you and chips off a chunk, what's going to show inside? Oh, well, that's pretty serious. Now, I'll tell you what, they say, and I believe them, it's easier to live if you're not always spinning out lies, because you don't have to remember the lies. If you're telling lies, you got to try to remember who you told what to, and build this little fake house that you're going to live in. It's going to fall apart if you just try to live the same thing all the way through. But this takes the grace of God. It takes help. It's work. Courage. Sometimes it's just frightening. I mean, it's frightening for a man to ask a woman to marry him, because what if she says, what if she laughs? What if she says, let me think about that for 20 years. I'll get back to you, you know. All kinds of things could happen. What if the woman says yes? That takes courage, doesn't it? You know, you may want this guy, but the closer you get, the weirder he seems. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it typically works. The closer you get, the weirder they seem. And it takes courage. And it also takes that last one, persistence. In whatever are the areas of living in our lives, wherever we are. Yeah, we do have to remember that line. I like that. The closer you get, the weirder they seem. But it takes persistence. And Washington, you know, they were whooped several times. They were whooped during the Revolutionary War. But it just happened to be several things came together at the right time, and he was on the ball. Even though he didn't have a chance, he was still on the ball, giving it everything he had, and they won. Crazy. When we persist, interesting things happen. We can't predict it. We cannot predict it. And sometimes the benefits come years later. Sometimes they come to other people than we intended. But if we persist, blessing comes. And it's a good thing. So I think these are 4 good words. You agree with me? 4 standards. And I honestly don't think most American presidents have exemplified all 4 of those very thoroughly. But these 2 guys did. And a few others did, I think. And in that way, at least in that way, they're examples for us. I did have a couple scriptures. The end of all things is near. Well, it was that way when the revolution started working up, all that tension. It was that way when the nation started to fall apart in the 1850s before the Civil War. It felt like the end of all things is near. Therefore, be alert and of sober mind so that you may pray. We don't know what they prayed and how much they prayed, but both of them prayed. And Lincoln said, especially after he got in the White House, he prayed every day. Thank God. You should too. So should I. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. There's Lincoln writing the hot letter and putting it in a drawer so that he can deal with the situation more calmly. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others. Seems to me, you know, in a way we could say Washington had a gift of leadership and kind of motivation. Lincoln had a gift of analysis and vision and ability to see a goal and move toward it, and they gave those gifts. They worked hard to give those gifts as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. Do you love your country? You know? I think these guys loved America. They had little different visions of it from each other and from other people around them, but they loved it. They loved the whole project. Lincoln called it the Great Experiment, and he loved it. Love is patient. Love is kind, does not envy, does not boast. You see, you get these things out of there, then you can start to be a person of integrity, courage, and persistence, because you're not about your self-image. You're about something else. Does not dishonor others, is not self-seeking, is not easily angered, keeps no record of wrongs. Powerful standards in Scripture, exemplified in significant ways, not in church. Washington went to church somewhat consistently. They say he did consistently leave before communion was offered, so he wouldn't participate in communion. Lincoln didn't go to church very much, and he never did join a church. But he quoted Scripture, especially the last few years of his life. In a lot of his speeches, he quoted Scripture. He kept the Bible nearby, and he let it shape him, how he thought and how he felt. So, two interesting guys, truly heroes, not just in America. They've been heroes around the world, and literally around the world, and things they thought and said and wrote. So it's quite an example for us, and I think it can be summed up in those 4 words. And I thought it's like VIP. They're very important people, right? VIP, except I got a 4th one. So what do you do with that? We'll see how it worked out. VIP, I just got VICP. VICP. Vision. So when you get home, you're trying to think of the 4 words. You think, he says VIP because he's a very important person. And there was one other, and then your wife will help you remember the other one, okay? Okay, that's it. Question for each of us is, how we doing? Any one of those. Pick any one of them and think about it a little. Work on it a little, and then get the paper back out and read them all. Okay, let's sing our song, shall we?